Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Yep, it's the world's most dangerous morning show, The Breakfast Club. Charlamagne the God, Angela Yee, DJ Envy is still at Super Bowl weekend being a thought. Okay, but we have a special guest in the building.
He's with his wife. Don't call him a thought. He's with his wife.
With your wife?
It was her birthday. Sheesh.
My man DeVon Franklin is here. Good morning, sir.
Yo, man. Good morning. Good morning. How you feeling?
He's got a new book called The Truth About Men, What Men and Women Need to Know. Can I read some of these chapters, Yee, before we start?
Oh, my gosh.
Introduction.
Here we go.
Are men really dogs? Chapter 1, beware the dog. Chapter 2, accept the dog. Chapter 3, master the dog. Chapter 4, don't feed the dog. Chapter 5, claim your territory. Chapter 6, discipline the dog.
Okay,
Chapter 7, create a
Charlamagne.
safe space. Chapter 8, repair the damage. What are you saying about the brothers, DeVon? What are you saying about us?
Man, I'm saying that we got to do our work. What I'm saying is that every man struggles. And so when you look at this, of course, I'm not calling men dogs at all. You know, I put in the introduction, men are not dogs, but we can behave like one when we allow the dog in us. And I believe that every man has a dog. And that's an analogy. It's a metaphor for lust. And that's a selfish impulse for professional, sexual, financial gain by any means necessary, even if those means are detrimental. So when you read all those chapters, I use this analogy that if we as men can master the dog, which means putting love in control of lust. Love is sacrificial, meaning love of self, love of God, love of the woman in our life. Lust is selfish. It demands to be fed whenever it starts to quote unquote bark. But when we as men put love in control of lust, selflessness in control of selfishness, then we begin to learn how to master this thing that all men have that you cannot eradicate, but you can master it. So all those chapter titles are just steps on how to do it.
Let me tell you
But
something.
So all you
definitely not
guys have a
vilifying
dog within you,
or victimizing
basically.
it.
Let me tell y'all something.
You have a dog
Let
within
me
you.
tell you both
You just have to
something.
master
Yes.
your dog.
Let me tell you both something.
What?
You're absolutely right. Okay.
I'm trying to tell
I
you.
ain't sitting there. I'm not gonna argue with you. When you're right, you're right.
Right.
Okay.
Now-
I feel like I've heard Minister Farrakhan say that you have to turn the dog around. You have to be. We're God. We're divine beings.
Yeah.
You know, so you have to turn that dog around. We're gods.
Yes. Well,
Yes.
it's true, but so often as men, we become so accustomed to the ways of the dog in our life. You know, selfishness, putting our own needs above everyone else, that it becomes hard to be aware that instead of God controlling our lives, it's the dog controlling our life. So the beginning part is awareness. Hey, I got to look in the mirror and say, you know what? I got to be better.
Yes.
And I got to do better. And I got to become more accountable and responsible for my behavior as a man.
You even talk about writing this book, right? What even made you do this? Maria Shriver, you said you had an interview and she said, you need to write a book about this. But it was a lot for you to have to be introspective about issues that you've had within yourself.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I didn't want to write this book, because I believe as men, we don't like to look in the mirror. And I don't like to look in the mirror. And I didn't have to write this book. It required me to be transparent. And I can't encourage everybody else to be transparent if I'm not going to be transparent. So Maria Shriver, prompted me because I had pitched her what this idea was. She said, you need to do it now. But the idea was already there. And one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book is because of pain. And I believe as men, we inflict so much pain on the lives of women. And women are in so much pain relative to our behavior. And one of the things that was very personal to me was my father. My father died when I was 9 years old of a heart attack when he was 36, at 36 years old. And so, we grew up. He was an alcoholic. But it wasn't until my teenage years where I found a picture of him, my mother, and a female family member sitting on a bed. And my mother was looking distraught. But my father and that female family member were looking very happy. And I said, what's going on here? Why is my mother in so much pain? Come to find out, my father and that female family member had an affair. And so I began to say, well, wait a minute. If my father, had an affair with someone else in my family and caused that kind of pain to my mother, what does that say about me? And I began to ask the question, can men be faithful? Can we? And when I would ask the women in my family, they would say 99% of all men cheat. And so as a kid, I'm like, is this true? And I said, well, what do I have to do to become the 1%? And what I began to realize is part of becoming the 1% was acknowledging that, I'm part of the problem too. If I don't do my work, if I don't recognize I have this thing in me that wants what it wants, whenever it wants it, if I don't learn to master that, I then, no matter how much I love my wife, and I love her to death, all right, and I am completely faithful, but if I think that I don't have to do my work, one day I will do something that will cause the same pain that my mother had in my wife's
Lord,
eyes if I don't do my work.
You have no idea how much you preach to the choir right now. Like I've been with my woman for 20 years. We both done dirt over the past 20 years, but I've been completely faithful since like 2016. Like I made that choice for that exact same reason, because I was like, I do not want to cause my family the same pain that my father caused my mom and our family.
There it is, man. There it is. And so much of us as men, our struggle is so much directly related to our fathers. And a lot of us, especially in communities of color, were raised without fathers, or the fathers that we had may not have been everything we wanted. And so a lot of times, especially I know for me, I grew up with a lot of brokenness because society says this is what men are supposed to be. You're supposed to be strong. You're supposed to be tough. You're not supposed to cry. And
you're supposed to get a lot of vagina.
Right. And if you don't do any of those things, most of the time growing up, we're met with violence. So what do we learn? Do not talk. Don't communicate. Suppress. But anything we suppress, we empower to destroy us. That's why this lust can get so strong, because we're not talking about it. We're not being honest about it. And what does it do? It finds a way to come out in the most detrimental and usually destructive ways. And a lot of times women are on the receiving end of this.
And a lot of times women are programmed to think, well, I have to deal with this type of behavior from my man because, like you said, 99% of men cheat, and women really believe that. So they're like, well, at least he treats me good in every other way.
Where y'all getting this number from?
Well, no, he said he asked in the book. He said he asked family members. But women,
I'm not saying that's a rule of fact.
No, women in their heads, if you ask women, they think all men cheat.
Yeah.
And so, like, we've had this discussion many times on Lip Service of women, like, well, men always cheat anyway. I don't know any man who doesn't cheat. So it kind of makes it normalized, that type of behavior, where that's just what it is.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book, because the book is not just for men, it's for women too. Because women are dealing with something and dealing with someone they do not understand. And so if you don't understand something, your odds of becoming successful with it are very, very low. So I wrote this book to illuminate truth about men so women can get it. So on this point, I believe that is one, it's a myth. It's not true. First of all, not all men cheat. However, I think when a woman, they do, but when a woman makes the decision that I will live less than what I believe I'm worth just to be with a man and accept him however he is, I believe that one of the reasons I wrote this book is for women to read it and say, you know what, I'm going to stop today. I'm going to challenge him on his behavior. Even if he leaves me, guess what? He was going to leave anyway. Because today begins a day of respect and a day of love. And I'm not just going to be a doormat for a man's ways. And what I talk about in the book, men need women to master this dog. You talk about you've been with your woman for 20 years. I guarantee you or I would not be the men that we are if we didn't have the love of a woman in our life.
Damn right.
But that's a love of a woman that we allow into our process. I think sometimes women think they can master the man's dog for him. You can't do that. But the love of a woman can help, but it starts with respect. And as men, when the woman in our life doesn't respect us, she allows us just to do whatever we want. And even though men don't like to be told what to do, we do need to be held accountable. And when we are held accountable, even if we may resist it, we will respect that woman because we know that she loves us enough to hold us accountable for our behavior.
Respect is the key word, right? Because you have all of these brothers who talk about how loyal they are to their homeboys and how trusting they are to their homeboys, and they'll ride and die for their dudes.
Yeah.
You got to feel like that with the woman that you go to sleep with.
Usually your woman is the one that rides and dies for you.
Yeah, I don't feel comfortable lying to my woman. Like this is supposed to be my rib. This is the woman that I have kids with, I'm married to. It's supposed to be my right hand. I don't feel comfortable, and I don't feel like a loyal human being lying to her.
No, not at all. Not at all. But the thing about it is, this is why I wrote the book, because I want women to be able to identify, are you dealing with a man who's leading with the master or leading with the dog? The dog is a manipulator. Lust wants to be served at all costs, so it will lie. It will, shade the truth. But the master says, I gotta live in truth. So what you're talking about is a life of mastery. When a man makes a decision that I'm not gonna lie to the woman in my life, I'm gonna be honest with her, even if it is a difficult truth. I love her enough to tell her the truth.
But for some people, I will say this, they feel like in a relationship, you have to go through so many things to get to that point. Like you have to go through, if you've been together for a while, the lying, the cheating, the breaking up, the getting back together for your relationship to be strong. How do you know when it's time to say, okay, it's time to walk away, this isn't working, or it's time for us to work on each other because this can be rectified?
I get this question a lot, and I wish that the process with men was less messy. A lot of it has to do with our brokenness, and a lot of it has to do with how we're raised. So what you're articulating is a truth of many relationships, that there's a lot of mess before you can get to a place where everything is good. What I will say is that sometimes the only thing a man will understand, and this dog and a man will understand, is pain. And the pain of the absence of the woman that he loves. And sometimes that work.
You gotta walk away.
I know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm saying? Sometimes women stay too close. And you got to step away. I love you enough that I got to step away. And let me tell you, the man who really has the master and is in touch with the master in themselves, when the woman they love steps away, it's a catalyst for change. I wish it didn't have to be that way, but in reality, a lot of times it is. Because as a man, we have so many things coming at us. The dog gets fed so often that we aren't always aware of how we're behaving until the person that we need, the woman that we deeply love, is gone. And so that absence, and this is one of the things a lot of times in my experience when women come to me for counseling, they don't want to do this. They don't want to take a step away. And I say, listen, I know you love him, right? But sometimes the best way to love him is from afar. I love you so much that I can't stay here and be treated less than I know I'm worth.
Now, you say in the book, I've been in the church my whole life, and I can say that no one, and I mean no one, teaches men how to deal with our urges. It's kind of mind-blowing. We can talk about the fruits of the Spirit, how to pray, how to preach, and how to sing praises, but rarely do we get real talk about how to deal with the dog.
Yeah. Listen, when I confronted my father for cheating back in the day, and you know what my father said to me? My father looked at me dead in my eye and goes, you only got one girlfriend? He said,
no way.
He said, one day you're going to understand.
Wow.
So in my mind, he started making me feel like something was wrong with me.
Yeah.
Because I only had one girlfriend.
Yeah.
And then, to just expand on that, then you also talk about your own transparency. And you said, after I married Megan, I caught myself looking at another woman. It was very casual, and I almost did it without thinking. Then I caught myself and thought, what are you doing? I had no desire for this woman. I was not interested in her in the least, but I found myself checking her out almost instinctively.
That's normal.
Now, what is some...
You got a post, right? Let me check your post.
Yeah, man, we alive, right?
No, but let's talk about
but let's
dealing with
unpack
these
both
urges.
of those. This is really important. So the first part, I was raised in the church, and I love the church. Church is a big part of who I am. However, in the church, a lot of times there's a culture of suppression because we don't talk about, okay, everybody gets horny. Everybody has urges. How do you deal with that? No matter how holy, no matter how saved, sanctified, filled with the Holy Ghost any of us may be, it doesn't stop what happens in our flesh. So in the church, a lot of times it's just like, don't talk about it. But anything we don't talk about, it's going to grow. So I wanted to say, listen, let's take the veil. Let's start speaking this truth. And so the whole point about Megan, which blew me away is like, hey, I thought, I'm getting married. It's going to put the dog to sleep. I was crazy and naive, but I thought that. I get married. I say I do. I don't have to worry about this lust. I don't have to worry about these selfish impulses. For a couple months, I was good. But then all of a sudden, I talk about that in the book. I started looking at this other woman. I'm like, what's wrong with me? I don't want to be unfaithful to my wife. I'm not even thinking about cheating on my wife. But why are these feelings and these thoughts coming? So while, yes, I have a pulse, at first, I was angry. I was mad. What's wrong with you, DeVon? And here's what happens. Most men do this. We judge ourselves. Most men don't like themselves. So that's what happened to me. I said, you're terrible. You're crazy. And so the moment I kept judging myself over these feelings, I could never deal with them. So I first had to get to the place where I was like, yo, I got this thing in me. I wish I didn't have this dog. It's here. Now what am I going to do about it? Now, once I acknowledge it, I can actually begin the process of mastery so that when a thought or feeling comes on me, I don't, get crazy. I'm like, okay, cool, it's there. But I'm not going to let that thought grow. I'm not going to let that feeling grow.
I can't deal with the guilt, meaning like if I cheat on my woman, number one, I'm a terrible liar, and I don't like lying to her because it just makes you feel like you're the fakest person alive. You know what I'm saying? And then just the guilt of it, like knowing you did something wrong. You bring that energy into the house, and then you start looking at her sideways like, what is she doing? Nah, bro, it's you.
It's us. Yeah. No, that guilt. But I think, Charlamagne, you're at a point where you are focused on mastery, and a lot of men yet aren't there. And that's why I wanted to write this book to say, hey, you know what? We have to get to a place where that guilt bothers us. There are some men right now, even as we're talking, that are cheating on the woman in their life and have no guilt or remorse about it because that's just the way it is. So first of all, it's having enough awareness where you begin to say, hey, if somebody was doing this to my mother or my sister or my daughter, would I accept it as a man? And if the answer is no, then as men, we should not perpetuate that same pain on someone else's sister, mother, or daughter, right? Because that guilt is so powerful when we love somebody and we've seen that hurt in their eyes. We never want to see it again, and that guilt can be convicting.
And you also talk about just when you have these urges, right, you have to think about what would happen if I did this. What are going to be the consequences?
Play out the consequences. I talk about this. It's so important. Just for anybody listening, what you got to do is before you act on the urge, before you, whatever it is, if it's for sex, if it's for money, if it's for greed, whatever it is, before you act on it, take a moment and play out the consequences. You're with somebody. You see somebody else you want. You hook up with her. what's going to happen the morning after? How are you going to feel when you come home and you have to be honest with the woman you were with? How long can you hide? How long can you keep up these dual identities? Play out the consequences and then play it to its logical conclusion, which is somebody's going to get hurt and your whole world is going to come tumbling down. Why? Because the dog, ultimately, if we don't master it, leads us to destruction. So when you play it all the way out, then come right back into the present and ask yourself, is it worth it?
Nope, I refuse to be the guy who ruined his family.
Yep.
Coming to see his 3 daughters on the weekend, wife crying, done cut her hair, hates me for the rest of her life.
Right.
I'm on child support. I refuse to be that dude.
Yeah.
And plus you want to change the narrative, you know what I'm saying? Because think about how black families have historically been dismantled in America all of these years. So I'm not gonna play a part in that.
No.
I want to change the narrative.
But I'm with you. And that's why I wrote this book. We can do better and we have to do better. There used to be a time where men's successes could cover our excesses. That day is over. And so we've got to look in the mirror and say, I've got to do my work. And also for women, here is the manual. Here's the information you need to know to better navigate your dealings with men. Because there are some men that are not like you, Charlamagne. They may not even be like me. They're not willing yet to do their work. But when women are put up on game and they know how to handle it, they can better navigate the dealings with men, not only by identifying if that man is dealing with the master or the dog, but also put themselves in a process where they can mitigate the potential pain by dealing with that man, and that man's not doing his work.
How old were you when you started doing your work?
Man, it's interesting because, last time I think I was here, we were talking about the commandments and we talked about the weight. So I was raised in the church, was going to wait until marriage for sex, didn't when I got in senior year in high school. And I pretty much was not celibate for about 4 or 5 years, while I was in college. And then coming out of college, I decided to be celibate. But even though I was celibate, I still wasn't a good dater, right? Even though I was celibate, the dog was still running a lot of my decision-making. And I really didn't start doing my work probably until my late 20s when I had this vision. It was literally like this vision from God where I was at the altar of my wedding. And I was getting ready to say I do. And the minister said, look behind you. And when I looked behind me, down the aisle were all the women I had dated, but they were all cut open, and their bodies were littered down the aisle.
Oh, my gosh.
And God said, do you think it was worth all of their hearts to get here? And that vision, in my late 20s, it startled me so much. I said, I've got to do it. I've got to do this work. I've got to put more intention in my dating. If I'm not serious about her, I've got to tell her. I can't sit up here, even in a dating sense, manipulate her for what I want in a moment. Because at a time when I was dating, sometimes as a man, you don't even think about, I'll date, like you said about your father. Hey, sometimes you date 3 or 4 just because that's what you're told to do. So it was my late 20s when I said, I've got to do this work. I've got to put, more integrity and honesty in what I'm doing. It doesn't mean that I was perfect. I'm still not perfect today. But that's when I began to do the work and began to become aware of my behavior as a man and the impact it was having on women.
What's interesting is the celibacy, right? You said actually helped you flourish in your career.
Absolutely.
Because you're focused.
And discipline. If a man can get discipline in this area of sex, there is nothing the man cannot do. And discipline is also important for women as well. And so I wrote a whole chapter about discipline and this idea of, instant gratification versus delayed gratification. And practicing delayed gratification is what will ultimately help us put the discipline in our life that we need. Discipline is the foundation for success, and success is peace.
I think for me, man, 34, 35 is when I started realizing, like, a lot of my behavior was hurting women. And that came in conversations with women. Because number one, I think a lot of times we don't realize that, especially the sisters are hurting the way that they are. And then, they come at us and they tell us these things. But I think around 35, I started to do the work. 37 is when I finally said, you have to be the change that you want to see in the world.
Amen.
And you have to cut all the BS out that comes with this lifestyle. Meaning other women, alcohol, drugs, whatever it is. And I think, I don't know if I realized too late. Is 37 too late?
I don't think it's ever too late. You know what I mean? Right.
Yeah.
Like it's never too late.
I'll tell you why I say that, because at 40, I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't know who the fuck I am. I have no clue. Everything I thought I knew, I don't know. I don't believe anything I used to believe. I'm just out here. And that's a weird space to be in.
But it's a weird space, but it's a great space. Because I think that as a man, and as a woman as well, it's important to not be so comfortable with our identity that we aren't afraid to ask questions. Who am I now? Just because I was this person last year last week, yesterday, doesn't mean that that's the person I am today. And to have the courage to admit, I'm not sure who I am right now. That's when massive, important, lifelong change can happen. Because so often we don't even ask those questions and we don't have enough awareness. And in the struggle is where the revelation is going to be. In the wrestling with identity is ultimately where the peace is going to be found, because so often we think we know who we are, but we don't. And it's important to have this type of transparency so that we can transform. And I believe that you're in the midst of a transformation, because when you're in that transformation, it is confusing, it's a little unsettling, it's deeply uncomfortable, but the results of it will be far worth what you're going through.
Because I feel like I'm in an abusive relationship with my therapist. Meaning, like, I feel like she did this to me. This is your fault. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're the one pulling out all these emotions. Mm-hmm. You're the one pulling out all these vulnerabilities. You're the one that making me question everything that I've ever done in my life. You know?
Right. It's almost like going to your dermatologist, man. You know, in order to get your
He
skin
does that
clear.
too.
You know what I'm saying? You got to bring the impurities.
You got
to bring the impurities to the surface, and that's just a part of the process. You know, and I think therapy is really vitally important, and not enough of us, especially as people of color, do it. But I think it's important, and I think it's a necessary step. And a lot of times you got to bring all that stuff up.
By the way, we got a shout out in the book, The Breakfast Club. I just want to put that out there. When you read it, you'll see the Breakfast Club shout out from the DJ Khaled interview.
Yeah.
Do you believe men are capable of making real change within themselves without the influence of a good woman?
Without a doubt, because I think that most men, when you live, based upon the ways of the dog, when you are just constantly feeding, your selfishness and feeding what you want, I think there's an emptiness. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times what you see played out in the culture is a result of the emptiness that we feel. But as men, we aren't always, we don't have the capability to always talk about it. So as a man, you can see a man without the love or involvement of a woman get to the place in their own life where they're like, who am I? Mm-hmm. What do I want to do? What do I want out of life? How do I get peace? How do I sleep at night? How do I get up in the morning and have a sense of self? And all of those things can happen, but it's going to require that man to hit whatever their rock bottom is.
In the intro of the book, I did read the intro. You mentioned a conversation about Harvey Weinstein. Mm-hmm. And it said, it made you share that you always wanted to write a book called Are Men Really Dogs? Why was Weinstein the motivation?
It wasn't so much the motivation. It just reminded me that I had the idea.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I had the idea years ago, and then when the Weinstein stuff kicked up, I was like, oh, right. Yeah,
because you do talk about the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement in here as well, as far as a different type of extreme.
Yeah, it's
not
important.
Controlling the dog within you.
Right. I think it's important. I think, sometimes these movements, don't always have clarity. They're not gotcha movements. So I just wanted to put some information in the book for those that are reading so they understand the origin of Me Too. Tarana Burke started that movement well over 10 years ago to give women of color, especially who are dealing with abuse, an opportunity to a safe space to talk out. And so I talk about that. So I put a lot of information so people know where the history of these organizations are and what they're actually designed to do.
Now I want to ask you about pornography, because you address this in the book. And you feel that pornography is harmful to relationships. And some people clearly do get addicted to porn, and that's harmful. But do you think that casually watching porn shouldn't be done?
I don't think it should be done, because in the book I have a whole thing about the one you feed. And so within us, you have to feed the master of the dog. I call vice dog food. I call virtue soul food. And I would put porn in the category of dog food, because that's what it is. It's vice. And also I have this fascinating research that I came across about Japan.
But that's extreme in Japan. That's very extreme.
What happened in Japan?
Dude, the pornography problem is so extreme in Japan that when they bring men and women, young men and women together in a social setting, they don't even engage one another. So as a result, the birth rate is declining, because they are so fixated on these fantasy worlds that's how they are becoming accustomed to.
They have those realistic dolls and everything.
Yeah. So I do believe that porn is dangerous. I do believe that even a casual, it's like, you eat bad food. Oh, once in a while. No, I think that it can be a slippery slope. And the reality is, of course, everybody deals with that differently. But I would say as a rule, that's why I put in the book, that it's something to be really looked at and to be managed so that you don't get into a situation where it manages you.
So you can manage it, you just can't overdo it. Like, is it, because I think some people learn a lot of tricks from porn.
Well, but here's the thing. But this is also where the dog runs wild, because
it can be educational.
You look at something that is not real. So it's the equivalent of, I'm a producer and I make movies. And so, you could look at the screen and say, wow, I want to put on a suit and, fly around the city, right? And have these claws. You can't do it.
That's right. Tell them, DeVon, those big penises you see on pornos are not real, ladies.
They're not real. Okay? You can't do it. So a lot of times you see these images and you think, I'll learn some tricks. But what it does is it creates an unrealistic expectation of what intimacy really looks like. And that can be destructive especially when you're trying to practice that intimacy with the person you love.
Nobody having hours of sex.
What?
Nobody having 2 hours of sex. That's not happening.
What about masturbation? Because you talk about
I talk about that as well. It's something you really got to look at, because again, I put that in the category of feeding the dog, right? And anytime the dog is well fed, it makes it harder for the master and the man to be strong enough.
I thought masturbation was healthy.
Listen, I'm not a psychologist.
I call that tranquilizing the dog. Okay, when you out of town,
I'm not a psychologist, a therapist, but that's why I put manage it. You know, and everybody has to wrestle with that thing. Everybody has to wrestle with it.
I definitely wrestle with it.
I'm not saying that, Charlamagne.
Trust me, when I'm out of town and my wife ain't with me, I wrestle with it. Okay, that happens.
Transparency, truth. I love it.
Who normally wins that match?
We don't want to know, Angela. We don't want to know.
The truth about men. Go get this book, man. I think it's very important for us brothers to do the work. Seriously, I don't even look at it as a thing that women have to do. Women got to do their own work, but it's not enough men doing the work, especially when it comes to our mental health and know, being vulnerable and really showcasing our emotions. Like all of that stuff we learned in the hood, get rid of that. Like we got to unlearn all of that BS. We all tough for no reason.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
For no reason.
For no
to
reason.
What end?
Yeah,
I'm with you.
Thank you, my brother.
My man.
By the way, DeVon Franklin will be at Angela Yee's book club at the Schomburg, so I'm really excited for that. We're going to have a great discussion. The truth about men, what men and women need to know. I was reading this book, and let me tell you something. I think at first when you read it for a man, it might feel a little harsh, you know, as far as comparing men to dogs, because men have been compared to dogs for so long. Like all men are dogs, all men are this. But it's some interesting analogies. You even have some comparisons to a dog trainer, and what dog trainers have to say about dogs, and compare that to...
Yeah, it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor. It's not to be taken literally, but I think it's a great metaphor to articulate the problem and also to put clear steps on what we can do about it.
Sometimes you got to tell yourself, sit.
That's it. I do it all the time.
Play dead.
Calm down. Heal.
DeVon Franklin, the truth about men. Thank you for coming, my brother.
My man.
All right.
Thank you.
Peace.
Appreciate you.
Yes,
man.
sir.